Today, we're digging into a really fascinating piece of history, all based on an article by Joanna Nolan. It's a story about this invisible thread, right? A link between two men who never even met, but who ended up completely reshaping how people talk to each other across North and West Africa back in the 19th century. So let's just dive right in with the big question that drives this whole story. How on earth can two people who are complete strangers to each other leave such a massive mark on the languages of an entire continent? It sounds kind of like a riddle, doesn't it? But it's a true story. So let's unravel how it all went down. Okay, so our story kicks off not with some grand scheme, but with just one curious guy in a brand new place. American diplomat who finds himself in North Africa in the 1800s. This is our first guy, William Brown Hodgson. Now, he was what you'd call an autodidact, which basically means he was a self-taught kind of guy. For him, studying local languages wasn't just a job assignment. It was a real passion. And that passion would lead to something pretty unexpected. Now, to really get what Hodgson was dealing with, you need to understand lingua franca. This wasn't anybody's native language. It was a pidgin, a super simplified bridge language that people had been using for hundreds of years all around the Mediterranean. Think of it as a purely practical tool, something sailors, merchants, and captives all used just to get by. It was spoken, almost never written down, but it got the job done. And that brings us to Hodgson's single biggest move. He saw this practical, spoken-only language and did something nobody had ever bothered to do before. He wrote the one and only practical dictionary and phrasebook for it. It was published in 1830, and this simple little book would end up having a huge impact. All right, so that brings us to the second half of our story. Years later, and hundreds of miles away, another man is facing his own communications nightmare over in West Africa. So here's Louis Faidherbe. And unlike Hodgson, he was no linguist. He was a French colonial officer, a soldier, who showed up in Africa speaking only French. But he figured out pretty fast that if you want to run a territory and command troops who all speak different languages, you've got a serious problem to solve. And that problem is communication. Now this is where it gets really interesting, because this timeline shows you the overlap. See, Hodgson publishes his dictionary in 1830. Then, just a decade later, Faidherbe gets posted to Algiers, the exact place where Hodgson's manual would have been the essential guide for any Frenchman trying to get by. They never met, but you can practically see their worlds about to collide right here. And, we don't even have to guess about this connection. In his own writings, Faidherbe says it flat out. He looked at what was working in Algeria, this practical, simplified way of communicating, and said, we need to copy that. Okay, this table, which comes from Faidherbe's actual notes, is just incredible. It shows he wasn't just learning lingua franca, he was taking it apart, piece by piece. He's noting which words are Italian, which are Spanish. Just like Hodgson, he had that self-taught, autodidact spirit. He needed to see how the language worked, not for some academic paper, but to solve a huge, real-world problem. So, based on everything he learned, Faidherbe came up with a clear method. He wasn't trying to make his soldiers into perfect French speakers. Nope. His goal was simple: clear instructions. Getting the message across was way more important than perfect grammar. And this quote right here, it pretty much sums up his whole way of thinking. Forget nuance, he says, we're going for simplicity. In a high-stakes environment with dozens of languages, being clear wasn't just a nice-to-have. It was everything. So, where did all this actually lead? Well, to a pretty surprising legacy: the birth of a brand new military language that would be spoken for decades. And that language was called Français tirailleur. It was a military pidgin created specifically for the Tirailleurs Senegalais, that West African regiment that Faidherbe founded. I mean, these soldiers came from all over, speaking tons of different languages. They absolutely needed a common tongue to understand their French officers and, just as important, to understand each other. Decades later, a French military manual actually made the connection explicit. It says that just like contact between Europeans and Arabs created sabir, which was really the French-flavored version of lingua franca, the exact same thing happened with the tirailleurs. It was a language born completely out of necessity.
So what did it actually sound like? Well, here is the earliest example we have, recorded back in 1864.
Manger bon, dormir bon, s'amuser bon, tirailleur pas bon, which translates to eating good, sleeping good, having fun good, being a soldier not good.
It's so direct, so simple, stripped down to just the essential parts, exactly like lingua franca was.
So when you step back and look at this whole story, what's the big takeaway? It's really about seeing language not as this rigid set of rules from a textbook, but as this living, breathing, practical tool for connecting people. When you lay it all out like this, the parallels are just wild. You've got two self-taught guys who cared more about clarity than complexity. They weren't in some university classroom, they were out in the world solving real communication problems. You could say Hodgson lit the spark with his little dictionary, and Featherbay took that spark and used it to build a fire, spreading that whole philosophy of practical language across West Africa.
And all of this leaves us with a really big final thought. This story shows us that new languages aren't always cooked up by experts. A lot of the time, they just grow from the ground up, shaped by the needs of soldiers and traders and people just trying to get by. It kind of makes you wonder, right? Whenever different worlds collide, who is it that really gets to decide what the new language is going to be?
If this story got you thinking and you want to go even deeper, I really recommend you check out Joanna Nolan's original article. You can find it on the Cadernos de Linguística website. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.